This will be the first in a series of demo videos showing you some camera tips, tricks, issues, techniques, things you should know about when you are working with cameras in Maya. Right now I have a scene in here and I'm in perspective mode. You can't see it because I have the green thing here, but I'm in perspective view here. If I were to go to 4-view orthographic, you can see that I have the top, front, and side views, but we're mostly going to be working with the perspective view and the camera view when I put in a camera in here. So first thing I want to do is I want to start, and I'm going to create a camera, and I just go into the main menu, create camera, and I'm just going to create a regular camera here, and you can see it'll bring a camera into the scene just like that. And now I have a camera here, and this is going to be our renderable camera, and this is going to be the camera that we are going to compose our scene with. If I want to see this view, I want to have two views. I want to have the perspective view in here, and I'm going to go into another view here. I'm just going to pick the top view. You can pick any view that you want, but I'm going to go into the view here, go to panels, perspective, and I'm going to call that, I'm going to assign that view to this camera here. Press the 6 key to give me shaded view, and you can see I have a camera in here. If you need to select your camera, you can do it through the outliner. I'm going to close the outliner for right now, and now what I can do is I can either move the camera in the perspective view and see it update in the camera view here. I can also go into that camera view and navigate around as I would any other view in Maya. The navigation with the Alt and the Command keys and the left, right, middle mouse button, they all work the same. I'm in camera view here, and what you can do also is that you can select these cameras. I'm going to open up and you can rename them. I'm going to open up the outliner again, and I can rename this camera whatever I want here. I'm going to call it render cam, so I know that this is going to be my main render camera. A few things I would like to do here. I'm going to go into the render settings here, so it's window, rendering editors, render settings, and this is going to set the parameters of the camera, how big the renders are going to be, how the aspect ratio, which is the frame size of the camera, and so on. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to make, first of all, the renderable camera the render cam here. So if I were to go make renders, I'm going to make sure that render cam is always going to be the renderable camera. And then we have the image size presets. It's going to be default to 640 by 480, and you can leave it to that for now, but there are some other presets that you can do. Usually a good one is to go to custom, and you can change that to some other aspect ratios like 720 by 540 or 480. That is another industry standard aspect ratio, and just make sure that it's at pixels per inch, and then you can change your resolution. For now, you can keep it on the presets 640 by 480. There's also some HD. You can do some HD 720 aspect ratios. And let's just go here. Let's just play around. I'm going to go into the view here, and I'm going to show the camera settings, and I'm going to show what that resolution actually looks like, because right now we can't really see where the parameters of the frames are. So I'm going to show resolution gate, and let's go camera settings as well, and I have fill, so fill the screen, and I can go overscan as well. It just gives you some borders outside of the frame here. So you can see that this is some HD. That's an HD aspect ratio. That's going to be a bigger file. If we were to go up and go to 640 by 480, you can see that it changes the aspect ratio and the frame size. And this is a good normal size that we could be working with for the class. So moving along, I've got those. I've got these render settings all the way I want it, and you can change them as well. I'm going to go to the 4 view so I can see my perspective, and you can see that it's if I move the camera, I can also see it update in here as well. And we can just kind of play around with that. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few compositional things that we can do to enhance your composition and the camera capabilities. So what's going on here is that I have my move settings here, and I'm going to just open up those attributes here. I'm going to pull the tool settings, and if you look, I have it set to local, which is a good setting. And what that means is that the rotations are going to be oriented to the object. So if I were to move the object and rotate the object, that local rotation is always going to stay the same, as opposed to world, where the world rotations are always going to stay to the world XYZ. And that's useful sometimes, but also can cause you problems. You actually want to make sure that your rotation makes sense to the way the object is placed in the scene. So I'm going to put it to local, and what that does is that that orients my object, so it's like I'm actually holding the camera. That's kind of how that works. So I've got my scene here composed. Let's get rid of that, and I'm going to select my camera. Now if you don't have the camera selected, if somehow you deselect it, the way that you can select the camera, there's a couple of ways. You can go into the outliner and just select the render cam from the outliner. Another way is to, in the view, if you go into the view section in the view panel, you can also select the camera, and that will select whatever view. So if I were in the perspective view, it will select the perspective camera or the top camera, but here, since we're in the render cam view, it's going to select that render cam. Alright, so now what I want to show you here is that I have two objects. Oops. And I'm just going to show you how they're oriented in here. I'm going to kind of show you that they're kind of close together, and they're not terribly exciting objects, and they're, you know, fairly small. But if I were to go into my camera view and I wanted those objects to look bigger and more distant from each other without actually moving those objects, like if you wanted to make a room look bigger, with the camera selected, you have some camera attributes over here in the channel box in the layer editor. The one that I want you to look at is focal length, and that is the length or the size of the lens. This is a virtual lens, but on a real camera you'd have a telephoto lens, you'd have a regular lens, you'd have a wide angle lens, or a zoom lens, which gives you a range of focal lengths, and you have the same thing here. It will default to 35, a 35 millimeter lens, which is basically a normal view, is kind of what your eye would see. But you can change that, and what I want you to see is that if I were to go here and I were to make that focal length smaller, so if I were to make it a 20, it brings the it makes it a wider angle lens. Now be aware that it doesn't move the camera. So I'm going to look at here. So I'm going to make that, I'm going to even make it smaller. Let's make it a 10. So it's like a fisheye lens. And what it did is it made it real small in the frame, but it didn't change the position of the camera. I'm going to go back to 20 because 20 is a good kind of a wider angle lens to work with. And let's just move that to object. And I'm changing what I'm doing here is I'm changing the move tool to be to object. So now again I'm moving it in relation, I'm moving the camera in relation to the object and not world. So let's just take a look here in the camera view. With a wider angle lens, I haven't made the size of these objects any bigger or moved them farther apart, but because I'm using a wider angle lens, the objects actually look bigger. Okay, it's almost like this is now a building with a big sphere behind it because I've made it a wider angle lens. And I can even go farther. Let's just make it 10 just to make it an extreme. I wouldn't go too much below a 20 focal length because then you start getting this huge distortion, which sometimes is kind of cool. Well, let's take a look inside here. We're inside the box and I have a wide angle lens, and you can see that cube that I have with this 10 angle lens kind of makes it look like a bigger room, and it really isn't. It's just a cube that I made. It's just a primitive. So let's go back to 20 and make it so it gives it some depth. It actually a shorter focal length or a smaller number of the focal length will make your objects look bigger and farther apart because I'm moving the camera in closer but widening the lens. The opposite is true with a telephoto lens. So if I were to go in here, let's just make it a 75, which is kind of telephoto. Now let's just make it 100, just for the heck of it. Here, and I'm going to move it back, and you can see that 100mm lens, it starts to flatten the scene. Let's just make it a 300. Let's see what happens. So I'm far back, but I have a telephoto lens, and I'm coming in closer with the focal length, and it's flattening. These objects look really, really close together, and that can be a desired effect as well. But again, I think for what you guys are doing, because you're using smaller scale objects and you want them to look more bigger, more dramatic, you can shorten your focal length and bring the camera in closer. And now, as you can see, these objects look bigger, more dramatic, and you can have some fun with that.